I smoothed my navy dress one more time before walking up to the wedding venue entrance, my son Brandon's big day. The coordinator smiled brightly until I gave my name. Her smile faltered. She checked her list twice, then 3 times. "I'm sorry, but you're not on here." My heart stopped. I spotted Brandon across the lobby and called his name. He turned, saw me, and rolled his eyes. "Did you really think you'd be invited?" he said loud enough for everyone to hear. I kept my voice steady. I understood perfectly. I left. Behind me, his phone started ringing. The October air hit my face as I pushed through the glass doors of the Riverside Hotel. My heels clicked against the pavement as I crossed the parking lot, each step taking me further from the crystal chandeliers and white rose arrangements inside, further from my son. The navy dress I'd spent 2 weeks searching for suddenly felt wrong, too formal, too hopeful. I'd even had my hair done that morning at a salon I couldn't really afford. What a fool I'd been. My 15-year-old Honda Civic sat in the far corner of the lot, right where I'd left it an hour ago when I'd arrived early, nervous and excited. I fumbled in my purse for the keys, my hands shaking. The wrapped gift was still in the back seat. I'd spent $300 on that crystal vase set, money I'd saved for months from my part-time nursing shifts. I wanted to give them something beautiful, something that would last. "Mom! Mom, wait!" I turned. Brandon was running across the parking lot, his tuxedo jacket flapping open, his phone pressed to his ear. For just a second, my heart lifted. Maybe he'd realized what he'd done. Maybe he was coming to apologize, to tell me there'd been some terrible mistake with the guest list. He reached me, breathing hard, and held up one finger while he finished his phone conversation. "Yes, Stuart, I understand. I'll handle it. Just tell them we need 30 minutes. He lowered the phone and looked at me, and that's when I saw his expression. Not remorse, panic. "I need you to sign something," he said. I stared at him. "You need me to what?" "There's a problem with the business. The Hartley deal. The one we've been working on for 6 months. It's closing today, and they need your signature on the final documents. Hartley Manufacturing, my late husband Richard's company. The business he'd built from nothing over 30 years, working 16-hour days, missing birthdays and holidays, pouring his whole heart into creating something that would last. He died 5 years ago from a heart attack at his desk, and in his will, he'd left 50% of the company to Brandon and 50% to me. Today?" I said slowly. "The deal is closing today? During your wedding?" Brandon's jaw tightened. "The timing wasn't my choice. The buyers set the deadline. Look, this isn't complicated. Stuart has the documents in his car. You just need to sign, and we can all get back to the ceremony. Just like that. Sign papers in a parking lot. Mom, this is a $4 million deal. $4 million. Do you understand what that means?" I understood plenty. I understood that for the past 2 years, ever since Brandon had started dating Courtney Fletcher, he'd been pulling away from me, returning fewer calls, canceling dinners, making excuses. The Fletchers were wealthy, old money types who lived in the kind of neighborhood where the houses had names instead of numbers. Preston Fletcher owned Fletcher Industries, one of the biggest manufacturing companies in the state. And Courtney, their only daughter, had set her sights on my son. Or rather, on his inheritance. "Why wasn't I told about this earlier?" I asked. "We've been busy with wedding planning." It slipped my mind. A black Mercedes pulled up beside us. A man in an expensive suit got out, carrying a leather briefcase. This had to be Stuart, Brandon's lawyer. He nodded at me with a tight smile. "Mrs. Hartley, I'm Stuart Chen." He caught himself. "Sorry, Stuart Patterson. We spoke on the phone last month about the quarterly reports. I didn't remember any phone call, but I nodded. Stewart opened his briefcase on the hood of his Mercedes and pulled out a stack of documents at least 2 inches thick. "If you could just sign here, here, and here," he said, flipping through pages and marking them with little yellow tabs. "We're on a very tight deadline. I'd like to read them first." Brandon made an exasperated sound. "Mom, seriously? Stewart's been working on this for months. Everything's in order. Then it won't hurt for me to read it." I pulled the first document closer and started scanning the dense legal language. Stewart shifted his weight, checking his watch. Brandon's phone rang again, and he walked a few steps away, speaking in low, urgent tones. The words on the page started to come into focus. Transfer of ownership, holding company, Fletcher Industries. My eyes caught on a number, $800,000. "Wait," I said. "This says I'm selling my 50% stake for $800,000? Stewart cleared his throat. "That's the agreed-upon price, yes. But my half of the company is worth at least $3 million. Richard and I built that business. I know what it's worth." "The valuation took into account various factors," Stewart said smoothly. "Debts, market conditions, future projections. 800,000 is actually quite generous." I kept reading, my heart sinking with each paragraph. This wasn't just a sale. The documents would transfer my ownership to a holding company controlled by Preston Fletcher. They'd make him the majority stakeholder. There was a non-compete clause that would prevent me from working in manufacturing ever again. And there, buried in Section 12, was language that would force me to sign away all rights to Richard's patents and designs. "This isn't what you told me," I said to Brandon, who'd finished his call and was hovering nearby. "You said this was an acquisition deal. You said we'd both be selling to outside buyers. It's basically the same thing." "It's not the same thing at all. This gives complete control to Preston Fletcher. Your father-in-law—" "He's not my father-in-law yet," Brandon said, then glanced at his watch. "Look, we don't have time for this. The ceremony starts in 45 minutes. I looked at my son, really looked at him. He was 28 years old, wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than my monthly rent. His hair was styled with some kind of product that made it shine under the parking lot lights. He looked successful, polished, every inch the young executive, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. "You knew I wouldn't agree to this," I said quietly. "That's why you didn't invite me to the wedding. You thought I'd be so desperate to be included, so hurt and humiliated, that I'd sign anything just to get back in your good graces. That's not true, isn't it? You timed this perfectly. The wedding, the deal, everything. You gambled that I'd be too emotional to think straight." Brandon's face flushed. "You're being paranoid. This is a good deal for everyone. You get $800,000. You can retire, travel, whatever you want. Why do you have to make everything so difficult?" Courtney appeared at the edge of the parking lot, still in her white wedding gown, the train draped over her arm. She looked like a princess from a fairy tale, all blonde curls and perfect makeup. She walked over and linked her arm through Brandon's, not even glancing at me. "Baby, everyone's waiting," she said sweetly. "Did she sign?" "Working on it," Brandon muttered. Courtney finally looked at me, her blue eyes cold despite her smile. "Mrs. Hartley, I know this must be overwhelming for you. Brandon told me you're not really a business person. That's why we brought Stewart, so he could explain everything in simple terms." I felt my face burn. Not a business person. I'd worked as a nurse for 35 years, pulling double shifts to help Richard keep the business afloat during the lean years. I'd balanced the books, paid the bills, helped with hiring decisions. After Richard died, I'd continued working with the management team to keep everything running while Brandon finished his MBA. I understand perfectly well what these documents say, I told her, and I'm not signing. I pushed the papers back toward Stuart and started walking to my car. Mom! Brandon grabbed my arm. You can't just walk away from this. If you don't sign, the deal falls apart. We lose everything. You mean you lose everything? I said, pulling my arm free. I'm not losing anything. I'm keeping what your father left me. Stuart stepped forward, his friendly demeanor evaporating. Mrs. Hartley, I should inform you that if you refuse to cooperate, we have other legal options available. The business partnership agreement includes provisions for situations like this. Then I suggest you use them, I said, through proper legal channels, with proper notice. Not in a parking lot during a wedding. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away. In my rearview mirror, I saw the three of them standing there, Stuart gesturing angrily, Courtney's face twisted with fury, and Brandon with his phone pressed to his ear again. I made it 2 blocks before I had to pull over because my hands were shaking too badly to drive safely. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in my small apartment, still wearing the navy dress, when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Mrs. Hartley? This is Preston Fletcher, Courtney's father. His voice was warm, paternal. I wonder if you might have a few minutes to meet with me. I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding, and I'd like to clear it up. I don't think we have anything to discuss, Mr. Fletcher. Please, call me Preston. And I really do think we should talk. I'm at my office downtown. It's Saturday, so we'll have complete privacy. No pressure, no lawyers. Just 2 reasonable people having a conversation. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Maybe it was the exhaustion or the lingering hope that this could all somehow be resolved. I changed out of the dress and into slacks and a blouse, then drove to Fletcher Industries. The building was a gleaming tower of glass and steel in the heart of downtown, 30 stories of corporate power. The lobby was all marble and modern art, empty on a Saturday afternoon, except for one security guard who checked my name against a list and directed me to the executive floor. Preston Fletcher's office could have fit my entire apartment inside it twice. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the river. The furniture was mahogany and leather, the kind that costs more than most people make in a year. Preston himself stood when I entered, coming around his massive desk to shake my hand. He was in his early 60s, silver-haired, with the kind of tan that comes from golf courses and yacht clubs. "Thank you so much for coming," he said, gesturing to a leather chair. "Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? I have some excellent pastries from the French bakery on 5th Street. I'm fine, thank you." He settled into the chair across from me, crossing one leg over the other, completely relaxed. "I want to apologize for what happened at the wedding. That was handled very poorly. Brandon is young, and he doesn't always think through the emotional impact of his business decisions. He excluded his own mother from his wedding. I know. And for what it's worth, I told him it was wrong. Courtney did too, but you know how stubborn young people can be." He smiled ruefully. "I have a feeling you and I understand each other, Tammy. May I call you Tammy, I suppose? We're both from the generation that built things, that worked for what we have." Richard was a remarkable man. I met him a few times over the years, at Chamber of Commerce events. He had vision. He did. Which is why I hate to see his legacy squandered by bureaucratic tangles and legal complications. Preston leaned forward, his expression sincere. "The truth is, Tammy, the business needs new leadership. Brandon is smart, but he's not ready to run a company on his own. And, forgive me for saying this, but you're a nurse, not a CEO. The company needs professional management, real capital investment, access to broader markets. That's what Fletcher Industries can provide. He pulled a folder from the side table and opened it, showing me a new set of documents. I've had my team prepare a revised offer. $1 million for your 50% stake. That's $200,000 more than this morning's offer, and well above the actual market value given the company's current state. You could retire comfortably, maybe buy a nice house, travel, enjoy life. Isn't that what Richard would have wanted for you? I looked at the number. $1 million. It was more money than I'd ever imagined having. I could pay off my debts, stop working the exhausting nursing shifts, maybe even visit my sister in Arizona like I'd been promising for years. Let me read through it, I said. Of course, take your time. But as I read, Preston's friendly demeanor began to shift. He checked his phone, then looked out the window, drumming his fingers on the armrest. By the time I reached page 15, he'd stopped pretending to be patient. "How much longer do you think you'll need?" he asked. "I'm only halfway through." "Surely you can see it's a straightforward sale agreement. $1 million in exchange for your shares. Very simple. There are a lot of clauses here. Non-compete agreements, intellectual property transfers, liability waivers." Preston stood abruptly and walked to his desk. When he returned, he was carrying another document. This one he dropped on the coffee table between us with a heavy thud. "Let me be direct with you, Tammy. We've been planning this acquisition for 8 months. Courtney didn't meet Brandon by accident. She researched the company, identified it as a good target, and pursued him specifically for this purpose. She's very good at her job." I felt cold. Her job? She works for me. Business development. And she developed this business beautifully. Brandon fell in love, or what he thinks is love. He's been sharing company information with her for months. We know every detail of your financial situation, every contract, every client relationship. He tapped the document he'd just put down. This is a lawsuit, already drafted and ready to file. It claims that your ownership of 50% of Hartley Manufacturing was never legally valid. Richard's will had a technical error in how it designated beneficiaries. The business should have gone entirely to Brandon as the sole heir. You've essentially been squatting on ownership for 5 years. That's not true. Richard's lawyer drew up that will. Everything was proper. Was it? Because we have 3 different law firms who say otherwise. We're prepared to litigate this for 5, maybe 10 years. The legal fees alone would bankrupt you. You'd have to sell your apartment, probably declare bankruptcy, and in the end, you'd lose anyway. My mouth had gone dry. "You're threatening me. I'm giving you a choice. Sign now, take the $1 million, and walk away. Or fight us and lose everything." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You're a smart woman. I think you can see which option makes more sense." The door opened, and Brandon walked in, still in his tuxedo, though he'd loosened his tie. Courtney followed, her wedding dress rustling. They must have left their own reception to come here. My son looked uncomfortable, but he didn't meet my eyes. Courtney, on the other hand, looked triumphant. She perched on the arm of Preston's chair, every inch the dutiful daughter. "Did you explain it to her, Daddy?" she asked. "I did. I think Tammy understands the situation now." "Good." Courtney turned to me, and the sweet bride from earlier was completely gone. In her place was someone cold and calculating. "You should know, Brandon and I are planning to start a family very soon. We want children right away. Don't you want to be part of your grandchildren's lives?" The threat was clear. Sign or never meet your grandchildren. Brandon finally spoke. "Mom, just sign the papers, Please, this doesn't have to be complicated. I looked at my son, at the man he'd become. Or maybe he'd always been this person, and I'd been too blind to see it. Too willing to make excuses, to believe the best of him. If I sign, will you tear up the lawsuit? Of course, Preston said smoothly. The moment the ink is dry, I thought about Richard, about the nights he'd come home exhausted, smelling of machine oil and determination. I thought about the pride in his voice when he'd talk about leaving something for Brandon, for our family. I thought about the will he'd made, how carefully he'd planned everything, and then I thought about myself. About how I'd let people walk over me my whole life, always trying to keep the peace, always trying to be agreeable, always putting everyone else first. My hand was shaking as I picked up the pen. Smart choice, Preston said. I signed my name on every yellow tab Stewart had marked. Brandon exhaled in relief. Courtney smiled. Preston looked satisfied, like a hunter who'd just brought down a prize elk. Stewart appeared from somewhere, notarized the documents with practiced efficiency, and tucked them into his briefcase. Preston pulled out a checkbook and wrote a check for $1 million, signing it with a flourish. There we are, he said, handing it to me. All done. I'm glad we could resolve this amicably. I took the check, folded it, and put it in my purse. The four of them walked me to the elevator, all smiles now, acting as if we'd just concluded a pleasant business meeting instead of what felt like an execution. As the elevator doors closed, I saw Courtney link her arm through Brandon's. She said something that made him laugh. Preston clapped him on the shoulder. They looked like a happy family. The elevator descended 30 floors, and with each floor I felt heavier. By the time I reached the parking garage, I was crying so hard I could barely see. I sat in my car and looked at the check in my hands. $1 million, all that was left of Richard's dream, all that was left of what we'd built together. I'd betrayed him. I'd let them take everything. And for what? To avoid a legal fight I might have won? To maintain some fantasy relationship with a son who clearly didn't love me? I cried for an hour in that parking garage before I could drive home. 3 days passed in a fog. I deposited the check on Monday morning, watching the teller's eyes widen at the amount. I paid off my credit cards, my car loan, the small debts that had been accumulating. For the first time in years, I wasn't living paycheck to paycheck. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt hollow. On Thursday morning, a courier arrived at my apartment with a large envelope. I signed for it with a sense of dread. Inside were more legal documents and a letter from my bank. The check had bounced. "Stop payment," it said. "Contact the issuer." I called Preston Fletcher's office immediately. His secretary informed me that Mr. Fletcher was unavailable and would return my call at his earliest convenience. He never did. The second set of documents the courier had delivered were worse. Brandon was suing me for mismanagement of the company during the 5 years I'd held ownership. The lawsuit claimed I'd made poor business decisions that had cost Hartley Manufacturing approximately $400,000 in lost revenue and opportunities. It demanded I repay that amount, plus interest and legal fees. My hands shook as I read through the claims. They'd twisted every honest mistake, every normal business risk, into evidence of incompetence. The time I'd approved a contract with a supplier who later went bankrupt, the marketing campaign that hadn't generated expected results, the equipment purchase that turned out to be unnecessary. None of it was malicious. None of it was unusual. But they'd documented everything, building a case that painted me as recklessly irresponsible. And the signature I'd put on the sale documents was being used against me. By signing, I'd acknowledged receipt of full and fair payment for my shares. Now that I no longer owned any part of the business, I had no access to company records to defend myself. I tried calling Brandon 17 times that day. Every call went straight to voicemail. I texted him, begging him to call me back. No response. Finally, I drove to his house. He lived in Oakmont Heights now, one of those gated communities where the houses look like they belong in magazines. Stone facades, 3-car garages, lawns so perfect they don't look real. I gave my name at the security gate. The guard made a call, then told me I wasn't on the approved visitor list. "Please," I said. "I'm his mother. I just need 5 minutes." "I'm sorry, ma'am. I can't let you through without approval." I pulled over to the side of the road outside the gate and waited. 2 hours later, Brandon's black BMW pulled up to the exit. I jumped out of my car and stood in front of his, forcing him to stop. He lowered his window, his face cold. "You need to move." "Brandon, please. We need to talk about the lawsuit." The check bounced. "I don't understand what's happening." "You should contact your lawyer." "I don't have a lawyer. I can't afford one. You're suing me for $400,000. That's more than I have. Then you shouldn't have mismanaged the company." His voice was flat, empty of emotion. "I didn't mismanage anything. I made normal business decisions. Your father made those same kinds of decisions all the time. My father knew what he was doing." A car pulled up behind Brandon's. Courtney in her white Range Rover. She got out, hand resting on her stomach. She was showing now, maybe 4 months along. I hadn't even known she was pregnant. "Is she harassing you?" Courtney called to Brandon. "Just leaving," he said. "Brandon, please," I tried again. "Whatever I did to make you hate me this much, I'm sorry. But this is wrong. You know it's wrong." Courtney walked up beside his car, standing between us. "You're stressing him out. Did you know stress is dangerous for the baby? My doctor says I need to avoid all sources of negativity. I'm his mother. You're a woman who can't accept that she's not needed anymore." Courtney placed her hand on Brandon's shoulder through the window. "We're building our own family now. We don't have room for your drama." She turned to me, and I saw the calculation in her eyes, the same cold intelligence I'd seen in her father's office. "If you keep showing up like this, we'll add harassment charges to the lawsuit." The security cameras recorded this whole interaction. "You blocked his car, refused to move. That's threatening behavior." Brandon wouldn't look at me. He just sat there, letting her speak for him, letting her threaten his own mother. "Is the baby even his?" I asked. Courtney's smile widened. "Of course. What a horrible thing to suggest. See, Brandon? This is exactly the kind of person she is." She got back in her Range Rover. Brandon raised his window and drove around my car. I stood there in the road, watching them disappear into their perfect neighborhood with its perfect houses and perfect lawns. I drove to the nearest grocery store parking lot and tried calling Brandon again. This time, Courtney answered his phone. "Stop calling," she said. "I need to talk to my son." "About what?" "About how you're a victim. About how unfair we're all being. Let me tell you something, Tammy. Brandon doesn't want you in his life. He's embarrassed by you. Your little apartment, your old car, your nursing scrubs. Do you know what he tells people when they ask about his family? He says his mother died with his father." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You're lying." "Am I?" "Ask yourself why he never invited you to meet my family before the wedding. Why he never brought you to any company events. Why he made up excuses every time you wanted to have dinner." Her voice dropped lower, almost kind. "He doesn't love you, Tammy. Maybe he did once, but not anymore. You're just an obstacle now. And the baby? Brandon knows about Gerald. I never hid it from him. We have what you'd call a modern marriage. He gets status and money. I get the same. The baby is part of the package. And frankly, Brandon doesn't care whose DNA it carries. It'll have his last name, and that's what matters. That's sick. That's business. Which you'd understand if you weren't so pathetically sentimental. She laughed, a light tinkling sound. Here's some advice. Sign whatever settlement they offer you, take whatever they're willing to give, and disappear. Because if you keep fighting, they'll destroy you. And unlike you, they actually have the resources to do it. She hung up. I sat in that parking lot until it got dark, until the store closed and a security guard knocked on my window to ask if I was okay. I told him I was fine, just tired. But I wasn't fine. I wasn't anywhere close to fine. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in a small office that smelled of old coffee and discount furniture. The lawyer's name was Walter Brennan, and he'd agreed to a 1-hour consultation for $200, which was about all I could afford. He was in his 50s, tired-looking, with a small practice that barely kept the lights on. But he was all I had. I'd brought all my documents. Everything from Richard's original will to the lawsuit Brandon had filed. Walter spent 45 minutes reading through everything, making occasional notes, his frown deepening with each page. Finally, he set the papers down and looked at me with something like pity. Mrs. Hartley, I'm going to be straight with you. This is bad. How bad? The papers you signed weren't just a sale agreement. There are arbitration clauses buried in here. That means you can't sue in regular court. You'd have to go through private arbitration, which is expensive, and usually favors whoever has more money. That's them, not you. But the check bounced. Doesn't that void the contract? Normally, yes, but you signed an acknowledgement of payment. They can argue that the check was a courtesy, that actual payment was handled through other means. It's sleazy, but it might hold up in arbitration. What about the mismanagement claims? Walter grimaced. That's the worst part. Looking at these allegations, some of them might actually have merit. Not because you did anything wrong, but because business decisions sometimes don't work out. That supplier going bankrupt, that was bad luck, not bad judgment. But in a lawsuit, they can make it look like incompetence. And since you no longer have access to company records, you can't prove your side. So, I'm going to lose. If you fight, probably yes. You'll spend whatever money you have left on legal fees and still lose. The smart move is to negotiate a settlement. Agree to pay something, maybe $50,000 or $60,000, and make this go away. $50,000 or $60,000. Almost everything I had left after paying my debts. And what if I don't? What if I refuse to settle? Then they take you to court, get a judgment against you, and garnish your wages for the next 20 years. They can force the sale of any assets you have. They can make your life very difficult. I left Walter's office with a headache and an even heavier heart. I drove home, paid for parking I couldn't really afford, and climbed the stairs to my second-floor apartment. The eviction notice was taped to my door. I was 3 months behind on rent. I'd been paying the minimum, trying to stretch my money, hoping something would change. The landlord was willing to work with me if I could pay the back rent within 2 weeks. Otherwise, I had to leave. That night, I counted every dollar I had. After paying debts and Walter's consultation fee, I had about $18,000 left from my savings. The back rent was $4,500. If I paid it, I'd have enough to live on for maybe 6 months if I was very careful. But that wouldn't leave anything for a settlement with Brandon, nothing for lawyers if the situation got worse. I looked around my apartment. It was small, just a 1-bedroom in an old building, but it was mine. Or it had been. Everything I owned fit into this space. 40 years of life, and it all fit in 900 square feet. I started packing that night, not because I'd decided to leave, but because I needed to do something, anything, to feel like I had some control. By morning, I'd made a decision. I couldn't pay the back rent. I'd move out, live in my car for a while until I figured something out. I'd keep working my shifts at the hospital, save every penny, and hope I could rebuild. It took 3 days to move everything into a storage unit. I kept one suitcase of clothes, some toiletries, a sleeping bag. Everything else went into a 10 by 10 metal box that cost $65 a month. The hospital parking lot became my home. I'd sleep there after late shifts, shower in the locker room before early shifts. Nobody noticed at first, or if they did, they didn't say anything. I was always careful, always clean, always professional, but exhaustion catches up to you. During a shift 2 weeks later, I fell asleep standing up. Just for a moment, just long enough to miss a patient's call light, Mrs. Patterson in room 312 needed help to the bathroom. By the time another nurse found her, she'd tried to go alone and fallen. Bruised hip could have been so much worse. My supervisor called me into her office. Janet had always liked me, had advocated for me getting better shifts, but now she looked disappointed. "Tammy, I have to write you up. This is serious." "I know. I'm sorry. It won't happen again. Are you okay? You look exhausted. Is everything all right at home?" I almost told her. The words were right there. But what would I say? That I was living in my car? That my son had stolen my husband's company and was suing me into poverty? That I couldn't afford an apartment anymore? "I'm fine," I said. "Just tired." 2 days later, I fell asleep again. This time during a medication check. I didn't make an error, thank God, but another nurse caught me with my eyes closed, standing at the medication cart. Janet called me back to her office. "I'm letting you go," she said quietly. "I'm sorry, Tammy. You're a good nurse, but I can't risk patient safety." I nodded. I couldn't even argue. She was right. I cleaned out my locker, said goodbye to no one, and walked out to my car. It was early November now, and the nights were getting cold. I'd been sleeping in the hospital parking lot, but I couldn't do that anymore. They'd notice. They'd call security. I drove to a grocery store on the other side of town and parked in the far corner of the lot. When the store closed, I reclined my seat as far as it would go, wrapped myself in the sleeping bag, and tried to sleep. The settlement offer arrived the next day, sent to my phone since I no longer had a permanent address. $50,000 to make the lawsuit go away. I had 2 weeks to accept, or they'd proceed to court. I had $18,000 to my name. I couldn't pay it. But if I didn't, they'd come after me with everything they had. I tried calling Brandon one last time. I used a friend's phone since he'd blocked mine. He answered without checking who it was. "Brandon, it's me. Please, just listen for 1 minute. How did you get this number? I'm living in my car. I lost my job. I lost my apartment. You're suing me for money I don't have. Please, son, please just talk to me. We can work this out." There was a long pause. For just a second, I thought I heard something in his breathing, some hesitation, some shred of the boy I'd raised. Then Courtney's voice in the background. "Is that her? Hang up. Don't call again," Brandon said, and the line went dead. That night, I parked outside his mansion. I didn't plan to approach, didn't plan to do anything. I just needed to see him, to remind myself that he was real, that this was really happening. I watched the lights in the windows, saw silhouettes moving behind curtains, Saw Brandon come home from work in his expensive car. Saw Courtney greet him at the door, her pregnant belly clearly visible now. And then I saw another car arrive, a silver Lexus. Gerald Hutchinson got out, carrying a bottle of wine. Preston Fletcher's business partner, the man from the photos. He rang the doorbell, and Courtney answered, kissed him on the cheek, welcomed him inside. I watched through the big front windows as the four of them sat down to dinner. Brandon, Courtney, Gerald, and Preston, who must have arrived earlier. They were laughing, raising glasses in toasts, celebrating something. They were celebrating their victory, celebrating how they'd taken everything from me. I started the car to drive away, but then Brandon looked out the window. He saw my car. He said something to the others. Preston pulled out his phone. I left quickly, but I knew what was coming. 3 days later, I was served with a restraining order. Brandon claimed I'd been stalking him, harassing him, showing up at his house repeatedly despite being told to stay away. He had security footage, phone records, everything. The court hearing was quick. I couldn't afford a lawyer. I tried to explain, but the judge looked at the evidence and granted a 2-year restraining order. I couldn't go within 500 feet of Brandon, his home, his workplace, or anywhere he regularly frequented. In the courtroom hallway afterward, Courtney approached me. She looked radiant in a designer maternity dress, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "That went well," she said sweetly. "You know, we're having a boy. We're going to name him Richard, after your late husband. Isn't that nice? We're taking everything that was yours, even the name." She walked away, laughing. I sat on a bench in the courthouse for 2 hours, unable to move. Finally, a security guard asked me to leave because they were closing. I drove to the cemetery where Richard was buried. It was the first time I'd been there in months. I'd been too ashamed. His gravestone was simple. Richard Thomas Hartley, beloved husband and father, dates of birth and death. I sat on the grass beside his grave and talked to him like he was still there, told him everything. Apologized for failing, for letting Brandon destroy everything we'd built, cried until I had no tears left. The cemetery closed at dusk. I had nowhere else to go. I remembered something then. Years ago, Richard had given me a key to a safety deposit box. He'd told me to keep it separate from everything else, somewhere safe. "If anything ever happens and you need proof of anything," he'd said, "everything important is in there." I'd put that key on my keychain and forgotten about it. After Richard died, I'd been so overwhelmed with grief and responsibility that I'd never opened the box. I looked at my keys in the dim light from the street lamp. There it was, small, brass, with a number engraved on it. First thing tomorrow morning, I'd go to the bank. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. I felt hope. The bank opened at 9. I was there at 8:45, sitting in my car, waiting. I'd slept in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, buying coffee every few hours so they wouldn't ask me to leave. When the doors unlocked, I was the first person inside. The safety deposit box was at the main branch downtown, the same bank where Richard and I had kept our accounts for 20 years. The woman at the customer service desk remembered me. "Mrs. Hartley," she said warmly, "it's been a while. How can I help you? I need to access my safety deposit box." She looked it up in the system, verified my identification, and led me to the vault. The box was medium-sized, number 473. She used the bank's key, and I used mine. And together we opened it. "Take your time," she said, leaving me alone in the small, private room. Inside the box were documents. Lots of them. I pulled everything out carefully, spreading them on the table. Richard's original will, properly witnessed and notarized, copies of the business incorporation documents, patent registrations, contracts, insurance policies, and at the bottom, a sealed envelope with my name on it in Richard's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter, dated 1 week before Richard died. I hadn't known he was going to die. He'd seemed tired, but not seriously ill. The heart attack had come without warning, or so I'd thought. The letter was in his neat, careful handwriting. My dearest Tammy, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and something has happened that made you remember this box. I hope you never need it. But if you do, everything you need is here. I need to tell you something I never said while I was alive. I've been worried about Brandon for years. He's our son, and I love him, but I see things in him that frighten me. A hunger for success that has nothing to do with achievement and everything to do with status. A willingness to compromise his values for money. A coldness that reminds me of my own father, and you know how that ended. I structured the will very carefully. The company is divided equally between you and Brandon, not because I don't trust him to run it, but because I don't trust him to treat you fairly without legal protections. I've included a clause in the original incorporation documents that my lawyer helped me draft. It's in Section 7, subsection D. If anyone tries to transfer your ownership without paying you full market value, as determined by an independent appraisal, the transfer is automatically void. Not just canceled, but void from the moment it was executed, and the person who engineered the fraudulent transfer forfeits their own ownership, all of it. I put this in place because I could see Brandon being influenced by the wrong people, by people who would see our company as an opportunity rather than a legacy. I'm including documents here that prove your ownership has always been legitimate and legal. I'm also including copies of all my patents, registered in both our names. You're a co-inventor on all of them, Tammy. You might not have been in the shop, but you were there for every late-night conversation, every problem I needed to solve. You're as much a part of these inventions as I am. There's also a video recording on a USB drive. I made it last week, sitting in my office, explaining everything. If someone challenges your ownership, this video will prove my intentions were clear and my mind was sound. Tammy, if you're reading this, someone has tried to cheat you. Don't let them. You're stronger than you know. You raised our son mostly alone because I was always at work. You kept us afloat when the business almost failed. You're the strongest person I've ever known, even if you don't see it yourself. Fight back. Use these documents. Protect what we built together. I love you. I always will. Richard. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Then I carefully went through every document in the box. The original incorporation papers were there, exactly as Richard had described. Section 7, subsection D. The poison pill clause, designed to protect me from exactly what had happened. The patent documents showed both our names. Every single one. I was listed as co-inventor, which meant even if they'd stolen the company, they couldn't legally use Richard's designs without my permission. The USB drive was at the bottom, carefully wrapped in a protective case. I held it in my hand, this tiny piece of plastic that contained my husband's voice, his final protection for me. I gathered everything carefully, put it back in the box, and asked the bank employee to make copies of everything. It took 2 hours. While I waited, I made a phone call. Carmichael and Associates, how may I direct your call? I need to speak with Helen Carmichael. It's about a business fraud case. Helen Carmichael had a reputation. She was known as the lawyer you hired when someone powerful had wronged you and you wanted to make them pay. She was in her 50s, had never lost a major case, and charged fees I absolutely could not afford. But she agreed to see me that afternoon. Her office was nothing like Preston Fletcher's. It was in an older building, comfortable but not ostentatious. The waiting room had worn leather chairs and law books lining the walls. When Helen came out to greet me, she was wearing a simple pantsuit and practical shoes. She looked like someone who worked for a living, not someone who played at it. "Mrs. Hartley, come on back." I followed her to her office and spread out my documents on her desk. She put on reading glasses and began going through everything methodically. I watched her face as she read Richard's letter, as she examined the incorporation documents, as she reviewed the patents. After 45 minutes, she looked up at me, and I saw something in her eyes that I hadn't seen in anyone's face in months. Respect. "This is one of the most airtight cases I've ever seen," she said. "Your husband was brilliant. This poison pill clause is perfect. They can't wiggle out of it." "I can't afford your fees," I said. "I'm living in my car. I have maybe $10,000 left to my name. I'll take it on contingency. I don't get paid unless you win, and then I take 30% of whatever we recover. But Mrs. Hartley, you're not just going to win. You're going to destroy them." "I don't want to destroy anyone. I just want what's mine. By the time we're done, those will be the same thing." She smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile of someone who'd been waiting for a case like this, a case where the good guys actually had the evidence to win. Let me explain what's going to happen. First, we file an emergency motion to freeze all assets related to Hartley Manufacturing. We do it today, before they know we have this evidence. Can we do that? With what you've shown me? Absolutely. We're going to argue that the transfer of your ownership was fraudulent from the moment it was executed. That means legally, you still own 50%. And since they haven't paid you fair value, the poison pill clause triggers. Your son loses his 50%. It all reverts to you. All of it? Every share. Your husband specifically structured it this way. If someone tries to steal from his widow, they lose everything. I sat back in my chair, trying to process this. What about the lawsuit Brandon filed? The mismanagement claims? Completely toothless once we prove the ownership transfer was void. He can't sue you for mismanaging something you still legally own. In fact, we'll probably countersue for malicious prosecution. And the Fletchers? Helen's smile widened. That's the beautiful part. Everything your son told Courtney about the business, every document he shared, every trade secret he revealed, that was him sharing proprietary information owned by you, not by him. The Fletchers and Gerald Hutchinson engaged in corporate espionage. There are federal charges for that. She picked up her phone and called someone. Marcus? Helen Carmichael. I need you in my office right now with paperwork for an emergency asset freeze. We're filing in 2 hours. She hung up and looked at me. Go get something to eat. Take a shower if you need one. There's a private bathroom down the hall. We're going to be here late tonight, and tomorrow we're going to war. I did take a shower, my first real one in a week. Helen's assistant brought me coffee and sandwiches. By 8 that evening, we'd filed papers with the court. By 9, we'd sent copies to Brandon's lawyers, Preston Fletcher's lawyers, and Gerald Hutchinson's office. By 10, my phone was ringing nonstop with blocked numbers. I didn't answer. Helen drove me to a hotel and paid for a room. Get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be intense. I lay in a real bed, for the first time in weeks, in clean sheets, in a warm room, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Richard's letter, about how he'd known this might happen, about how he'd protected me even after death. And I thought about Brandon, about the little boy who used to climb into my lap when he was scared, who used to save his allowance to buy me flowers on Mother's Day, who used to tell me I was the best mom in the world. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost him. Or maybe he'd never been the person I thought he was. Either way, it was time to stop grieving for the son I'd lost and start fighting for what was mine. The emergency hearing was scheduled for 10 in the morning. Helen wore a Navy suit that meant business. She'd brought her partner Marcus, a younger lawyer who carried 3 briefcases full of documents. Brandon's lawyers were there, looking confused and annoyed at being dragged to court on short notice. Preston Fletcher sat in the gallery with his own legal team. Gerald Hutchinson was absent. Brandon arrived 10 minutes late, Courtney beside him. He looked terrible. Dark circles under his eyes, his suit rumpled. When he saw me sitting at the plaintiff's table with Helen, his face went white. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Catherine Morrison. She had a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. Helen stood and addressed the court. Your Honor, we're here because the defendants engaged in a systematic scheme to defraud my client of her rightful ownership in Hartley Manufacturing. I have evidence that the transfer of ownership was obtained through coercion and false pretenses, and that the purchase price was deliberately set below market value to trigger a protective clause in the company's incorporation documents. Brandon's lawyer, a man named Douglas Chen, stood up. Your Honor, this is absurd. Mrs. Hartley voluntarily sold her shares. She signed the documents willingly. This is buyer's remorse, nothing more. Then you won't mind if we present our evidence, Helen said smoothly. I'd like to submit into evidence the original incorporation documents for Hartley Manufacturing, specifically Section 7, subsection D. She handed copies to the judge and to opposing counsel. I watched Douglas's face as he read. He went pale. Judge Morrison read carefully, then looked up. Mr. Chen, were you aware of this clause when you advised your client to purchase Mrs. Hartley's shares? Your Honor, I'd need to review the documents more thoroughly. That's a no, the judge said dryly. Miss Carmichael, please explain this clause for the record. Helen stood. The clause states that if ownership shares are transferred for less than fair market value, as determined by independent appraisal, the transfer is void. Furthermore, if the transfer is found to be fraudulent, the person who engineered the fraud forfeits their own shares. And you're claiming the transfer was fraudulent how? Multiple ways, Your Honor. First, my client was coerced into signing under threat of litigation. Second, she was deliberately excluded from her son's wedding to create emotional vulnerability. Third, the price offered was less than 1/3 of actual market value. And fourth, the defendants bounced the check they gave her, meaning she never actually received payment at all. Judge Morrison looked at Douglas. Is this true? You bounced the check? Douglas looked at Preston Fletcher, who looked furious. There was an administrative error with the account, an error that allowed you to obtain signed documents without paying for them. That's called fraud, Counselor. The judge flipped through more documents. I'm granting the emergency freeze. All assets, accounts, and operations of Hartley Manufacturing are frozen effective immediately pending a full hearing. Your Honor, Douglas protested. This will cause irreparable harm to the business. That's unfortunate. Maybe your clients should have paid for what they bought. She looked at Helen. What else? We've also notified federal authorities about potential violations of intellectual property law and corporate espionage. Mr. Gerald Hutchinson, in cooperation with Fletcher Industries, has been filing trademark applications for patents owned by my client and her late husband. We have documentation showing Mr. Praskardin. Hutchinson received proprietary information through Miss Courtney Fletcher, who obtained it from Brandon Hartley. Courtney stood up. "That's a lie." "Sit down," Judge Morrison said sharply. "You're not a party to these proceedings." "The baby is Brandon's," Courtney said desperately. "We're married. This is our family business." Helen turned to face her. "Actually, Miss Fletcher, we have reason to believe the child you're carrying was fathered by Gerald Hutchinson. We have photographs, hotel records, and witness statements documenting your ongoing affair during your marriage to Mr. Hartley." Brandon's head snapped toward Courtney. "What?" "She's lying," Courtney said, but her voice lacked conviction. Helen pulled out a folder and handed copies to the judge and to Brandon's lawyer. "These are the photographs. These are hotel receipts in Mr. Hutchinson's name with Miss Fletcher as the guest. These are credit card records showing purchases of maternity items and prenatal vitamins charged to Mr. Hutchinson's account." Brandon stood up, staring at Courtney. "Is it true?" "Baby, listen to me," she said, reaching for him. He jerked away from her. "Is it true?" "It's complicated." "Is the baby mine?" Courtney looked around the courtroom, at all the faces watching her, and something in her broke. "No," she whispered. "Probably not." The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison banged her gavel. "Order! Everyone sit down!" Brandon sank into his chair, his face in his hands. Preston Fletcher was arguing with his lawyers. Douglas looked like he wanted to disappear. Judge Morrison looked exhausted. "I'm ordering a full audit of Hartley Manufacturing, its subsidiaries, and all related entities. I'm appointing an independent receiver to manage operations during the investigation. And I'm referring this matter to federal authorities for potential criminal charges related to corporate espionage and intellectual property theft." She looked directly at Brandon. "Mr. Hartley, if what Miss Carmichael says is true, you conspired to defraud your own mother out of her inheritance and her late husband's legacy. I suggest you retain separate counsel from Mr. Fletcher, because your interests are no longer aligned." The hearing ended. People filed out, but I stayed seated, unable to quite believe what had just happened. Helen sat beside me. That went better than I expected. The wife admitting to the affair was a bonus. "I don't feel good about any of this." "You should. You just got your life back." Outside the courthouse, Brandon was standing alone. Courtney had left with her father. His lawyers had abandoned him. He saw me and walked over slowly, like a man heading to his own execution. "Mom," he said. It was the first time he'd called me that in months. "Brandon, I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry." His voice cracked. "I thought I was being smart. I thought I was building something, but I was just being used." "Yes, you were. Courtney is divorcing me. Her father's lawyers are claiming I was the mastermind of everything, that I manipulated them. They're going to try to pin all the legal liability on me. That's what happens when you make deals with people who have no loyalty." He nodded, tears running down his face. "I don't know what to do." "Figure it out," I said. "You're an adult. You made your choices. Will you help me?" I looked at this man who was my son but also a stranger. "I'll think about it. But Brandon, understand this. The restraining order you filed against me is still in effect. You need to move away from me right now before security notices. Can't you drop it?" "Not yet. You put me through hell. You cost me everything. I'll consider dropping it eventually, but not today." I pulled an envelope from my purse and handed it to him. "This is the name and number of a therapist who specializes in helping people who've lost their way. Make an appointment." He took it with shaking hands. "And Brandon, I'm not giving you money. I'm not bailing you out. You did this to yourself. You're going to have to dig yourself out." I handed him $300 in cash. "This is for first month's rent somewhere. That's all you're getting." "Thank you," he whispered. "Don't thank me. Prove you've changed." I walked away, leaving him standing there alone. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. 3 months later, I was sitting in my new office at Hartley Manufacturing. It wasn't large or fancy, but it had a window overlooking the factory floor, and I could see Richard's name still painted on the wall. Hartley Manufacturing, Est 1993. The legal proceedings had moved faster than anyone expected because the evidence was overwhelming. Gerald Hutchinson had turned on the Fletchers almost immediately, providing testimony about Preston's plans to steal Richard's patents. Stewart, Brandon's lawyer, had done the same, trying to save his law license. The judge had voided the fraudulent sale and triggered the poison pill clause. Brandon lost his 50%, and it reverted to me. I now owned 100% of the company. Additionally, the Fletchers were ordered to pay $3 million in damages. Preston Fletcher was facing federal charges for corporate espionage. Gerald Hutchinson had already pleaded guilty and was cooperating with prosecutors. Courtney's divorce from Brandon was finalized quickly. She'd returned to using her maiden name. The baby, a boy, had been born in February. DNA tests confirmed Gerald Hutchinson was the father. Brandon had no legal rights to the child, and based on what I heard through Helen, he wasn't fighting for any. As for Brandon himself, he'd disappeared for a while. No one knew where he'd gone. His expensive house in Oakmont Heights went into foreclosure. His BMW was repossessed. Preston's lawyers had successfully painted him as the mastermind, and while criminal charges hadn't been filed, his reputation in the business community was destroyed. I took control of Hartley Manufacturing and discovered it was in worse shape than I'd thought. Brandon and the Fletchers had been stripping assets, moving money into offshore accounts, preparing to dissolve the company and sell off the patents. If I'd waited another month, there might have been nothing left to save. I brought in new management. I implemented Richard's original vision for the company, focusing on quality over short-term profits. I established ethical guidelines and transparent practices. It was slow, hard work, but the company began to stabilize. I also went back to nursing part-time. Not because I needed the money, but because I loved it. I worked 2 shifts a week at the hospital, and the rest of the time I managed the business. It felt right, honoring both parts of who I was. I bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing fancy, just a 3-bedroom ranch with a yard and a garage. I furnished it slowly, choosing things I actually liked instead of making do with whatever was cheap. I planted flowers in the spring. Helen Carmichael became a friend. We had lunch once a month, talking about cases and life and the strange ways justice sometimes worked. The restraining order against Brandon expired after a year. He didn't try to contact me during that time. I heard through various sources that he'd moved to another state, was working a regular job, living modestly. He'd started therapy, as I'd suggested. On what would have been my 43rd wedding anniversary with Richard, I went to the cemetery. I brought flowers and sat by his grave, telling him everything that had happened. I protected it, I told him. I almost lost it, but I got it back. I kept my promise. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Mom, this is Brandon. I'm using a new phone. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know I'm still in therapy, still working on being better. I got a job as a junior accountant. It's nothing special, but it's honest work. I'm not asking for forgiveness or for another chance. I just wanted you to know I'm trying. I hope you're doing okay." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed a response. I'm glad you're working on yourself. Keep going. I didn't say anything else. Didn't invite him to visit, didn't ask about his life, didn't offer to help. But I didn't block the number either. 6 months later, he texted again. Happy birthday, Mom. I responded, thank you. Another 6 months. I'm 1 year sober from the pills I was taking. Didn't realize I had a problem until I stopped. Me. That's good. I'm proud of you for getting help. It went like this for a year. Short messages, months apart. No pressure, no expectations. Just small acknowledgments that we were both still alive, still trying. Finally, 2 years after the courthouse, he asked, would you be willing to meet for coffee? Just coffee. No expectations. I thought about it for a week. Then I responded, yes, but somewhere public, and you pay. We met at a diner halfway between his apartment and my house. He looked different. Older, tired, but also somehow more real. He'd lost the polished veneer, the corporate armor. He was wearing jeans and a regular button-down shirt. He looked like someone who actually worked for a living. We sat across from each other in a booth, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. You look good, he finally said. So do you. Different, but good. I've been working with a therapist for 2 years now, processing everything, understanding why I did what I did. He looked down at his coffee. I was ashamed of where I came from. Of growing up in a small apartment, of you working multiple jobs, of Dad always being too busy to come to my school events. I thought money and status would make me happy, would make me feel like I mattered. And did it? For about 5 minutes. Then I just felt empty. He looked up at me. I don't expect you to forgive me. What I did was unforgivable. I excluded you from my wedding. I tried to steal Dad's company. I let Courtney and her father manipulate me into hurting you. You weren't manipulated, Brandon. You made choices. You're right. I did. And I'm living with those choices. He pulled out his wallet and showed me a photo. A small apartment, sparsely furnished. This is where I live now. It's in Ohio. I'm an accountant for a nonprofit. I make $38,000 a year. I ride the bus to work. I cook my own meals. And I'm happier than I ever was in that mansion. I'm glad. Are you happy, Mom? I thought about my small house, my job at the hospital, the company that was slowly rebuilding under my care. I thought about the friends I'd made, the life I'd created from the ruins. Yes, I said. I am. Good. That's good. He looked like he might cry. I know I don't deserve a relationship with you, but if you're ever willing, if there's ever a chance that we could maybe, slowly, rebuild something, I'd like that. We'll see, I said. This is a start. Coffee once a month, maybe. We'll see where it goes from there. I'll take it. We talked for an hour. Not about the lawsuit or Courtney or the company. We talked about small things. His job, my flowers, the book he was reading, the show I was watching. Simple, normal conversation. When we said goodbye in the parking lot, he hesitated, then asked, "Can I hug you?" I let him. It was brief, awkward, but it was something. He drove away in a 10-year-old Toyota, and I stood there watching his taillights disappear. I couldn't say if we'd ever have a real relationship again. The damage was too deep, the betrayal too complete. But we had this. One coffee, one conversation, one small step. It was more than I'd had before. I learned something through all of this. Something I want to share with anyone listening who might need to hear it. I thought being a good mother meant sacrificing everything, accepting anything, forgiving without limits. But that's not love. That's enabling. Real love includes boundaries. Real love includes consequences. Real love means respecting yourself enough to walk away when someone treats you as less than human, even if that someone is your child. Richard knew this. That's why he protected me with that poison pill clause. He knew I might be too loving, too forgiving, too willing to destroy myself for Brandon. He gave me the tools to save myself, but I had to choose to use them. Brandon lost everything because he treated people as stepping stones. He's learning now that relationships aren't transactions. That family isn't something you can discard when it's inconvenient and reclaim when it's profitable. I didn't get my fairy tale ending. Brandon and I will probably never have the relationship I dreamed of when he was born, when I first held him in my arms and imagined all the years ahead. But I got something better. I got myself back. I got my self-respect back. I got peace. And that's worth more than any reconciliation built on resentment and obligation. Richard once told me, not long before he died, "Tammy, you're the strongest person I know. You just don't know it yet." It took losing everything to finally understand what he meant. So if you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in my story, whether you're the parent who gave too much or the child who took too much, know this: it's never too late to change. It's never too late to set boundaries. It's never too late to reclaim your dignity. And it's never too late to learn that love without respect isn't love at all. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones we love most. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is protect ourselves from them, even when it breaks our hearts. Richard protected me even after death, but I had to be willing to use what he gave me. I had to be willing to fight. And in the end, that's what saved me. Not the documents or the lawyer or the judge's ruling. It was my choice to stop accepting less than I deserved. My choice to stand up and say, "No more." That's the lesson I want to leave you with today. Your worth is not determined by whether people treat you well. Your worth is inherent, unchangeable, sacred, and you have every right to defend it, even from the people you love most, especially from them. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to set boundaries with a family member? Have you ever felt torn between love and self-respect? How did you handle it? Leave a comment below and share your story. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. Subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming betrayal and finding strength you didn't know you had. And share this with someone who might need to hear it. You never know who might be struggling with a similar situation and needs to know they're not alone. Thank you for listening to my story. I know it wasn't easy to hear, but sometimes we need to walk through the darkness to appreciate the light. I hope wherever you are today, whatever you're facing, you know that you're stronger than you think. You're more resilient than you imagine. And you're worthy of love that honors you, not love that diminishes you. Take care of yourselves. Set your boundaries. Defend your dignity. And remember that sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most peaceful outcomes. Until next time,